Good morning, everybody. Good morning. How are you? Jerry's going to be on the phone. Hey, Jerry.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, we got Secretary just came in. We're going through greetings and handshaking. We'll introduce you in a second. Yeah, how are you?
Secretary Mike Dennis from the Nature Conservancy.
Mike, how are you?
Good, thanks for coming. I'm Doug Hyken with Oregon Wild.
Oregon Wild. Okay. Hi, Bay Stewart.
President of the Association.
Great to see you.
Guys, you're not going
Hey, Peter. Good to see you.
Sometimes almost in Colorado. Basically, we're the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Northern California, Idaho.
Hello, Francis and Rankin, Cascading Water.
Thanks for a lot.
Thank you for being here.
I'm Molesky.
How are you? Francis, hello. I think you're going to sit there. And Secretary Salazar, this is Jerry Franklin. This would be your famous scientist. Since you get this device. Jerry?
Hi.
Hey, Jerry Franklin.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here.
I've been reading about you a lot.
Oh dear.
Thanks for joining us by phone today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, well let's get started. We're going to try and expedite things because we're starting a bit late, so everybody has an opportunity to speak. The purpose of this meeting, this would be obviously this is momentous in a way, since this is the first Secretary of Interior to visit this county, this part of the state, in a quarter of a century. And the Secretary, Jeff and I and other members of the delegation had a great meeting with him about a month ago in Washington, and he said that he had not meaned to put off our proposal for a meeting to deal with our problems, but he was kind of occupied with what was going on down in the Gulf of Mexico for a while. But now he has an opportunity to refocus, and he realizes that it's a priority that we deal with the ONC lands issues here in Southwest Oregon, and is giving us a generous grant of his time. And I'm just going to ask of the group, and this is about the third time I've convened this or a similar group, once in Springfield, once in the forest in August, which is where I'd love to get them out into the woods, maybe next year in the summertime, to look at different management proposals and regimes, but is how can we move forward? It's a lot of history here, and there's a lot of different versions of history, and we got plenty of time to go over that any other time. We have a unique opportunity here today to present to Secretary Salazar what our current concerns are and how we each have a vision of moving forward from this point. As some have said, Paul very eloquently recently, that he and I have discussed this issue for years, and when we finally came to a meeting of our mind and found we could work together was when I said, it's not what we take out of the forest, and I think the scientists would agree with this, it's what we leave behind in terms of a legacy for that forest and future generations of Oregonians, and who are dependent upon the forest in a multitude of ways. We're dependent upon them economically for the lumber and wood products industry. We're dependent upon them for another important industry, obviously, which is tourism and recreation and hunting. We're also dependent upon them for fisheries and water quality and all the things that make Oregon a great place to live. And I've been fighting forest wars here for nearly a quarter of a century, and I think it's time that as Oregonians all gather around the table, and one other Westerner who understands these kinds of cultural clashes and controversies, that we come together and try and help him with a vision of how we can move forward with some resolution and getting values that meet all of our needs. And with that, I'm going to turn to Senator Jeff Merkley. Jeff?
Well, I want to thank the Secretary very much for coming, and also for the tremendous work he did in helping the Klamath Basin. He was willing to call me right when it was in the middle of the oil Gulf crisis, runaway well, if you will, and yet still we had a challenge in Klamath, was still connecting and helping free up funds in all kinds of different ways to assist in that area. And then to come and help us find a path forward in this challenge. And this challenge is 3 decades of dysfunction that have led to a lose-lose proposition in which we have overgrown forests that are not ideal for ecosystems and certainly not ideal for timber production, but often are ideal, unfortunately, for fire and for disease. Meanwhile, without a sustainable cut, we don't have sustainable jobs, and we don't have a sustainable forest products industry. And so figuring a path through all of that is of enormous value to our region. And the challenges are complicated by the addition of essentially the collapse of the housing industry, which has lowered the demand for lumber, and Canadian imports, which have been subsidized by the Canadian government, have been an additional piece. And then a lot of frustration with the failure to find a new plan to replace the Western Oregon Plan Review, or WAPR, that would allow the ONC lands to be found the right balance of sustainable harvest. We have a few bright spots. One of those are small-scale stewardship agreements that show how all the various folks come to the table and figure out a plan on a small scale. We figure out how to do that on a larger scale. And another potential bright spot is growing possibilities for biomass. And it's such a contribution to be able, as like to say, somebody said to me once, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had some kind of invention that would take carbon dioxide out of the air? And I was able to respond, well, we grow millions of those in Oregon. And this is potential additional revenue stream for our forests, and another way to keep jobs in the woods and work in partnership with traditional forest products. I also wanted to mention that tied up in this is the importance of the federal government upholding its end of the bargain on the secure rural schools funding, that is the partnership on OC lands, in which counties share from the revenue flow, but if there isn't revenue flow because timber cutting is not proceeding, that the federal government sustain those revenue commitments to the counties. So lots to talk about, but the really big deal is that you've come to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Merkley. With that, we are back on schedule. We do have some senators who can speak in succinct ways, and I'm pleased to now turn to Professor Franklin and Norm. Which order are you going to go in?
I'm going to go first.
Okay.
And here we've summarized our comments, and I'm going to quickly go through them and then leave some time for Jerry to follow up my comments.
These are TV. We might put them over by there, Norm, just in case you say something particularly pithy.
You can always hope. And I want to start by saying it's Jerry Franklin is on the phone. He's University of Washington, and I am from Oregon State University. And our comments represent our views and not those of our respective institutions. Now, I'm going to briefly summarize our remarks, hitting what's in italics for those of you that have a copy. Our comments today apply to the dry forests of Southwest Oregon and focus on the BLM and lands there. We've recently been working with the BLM to test restoration strategies for these forests and are grateful for the opportunity to share our initial conclusions from these efforts. The dry forests managed by BLM in southwestern Oregon and the resources they contain are at significant risk in their current condition. Potentially subject to large high-severity fire and outbreaks of defoliating insects and bark beetles, the latter resulting from drought and competition-induced stress in trees. Climate change intensifies these threats. An aggressive program is needed to restore more ecologically characteristic and sustainable conditions in these forests and landscapes. Ecosystem restoration, planned and implemented at the landscape scale, is required rather than actions focused primarily on fire or any other singular objective. Treatment focused on reduction of fuels and control wildfires, while helpful, will not achieve the objective of restoring sustainable forests because they leave much of the forest in an uncharacteristic and unsustainable condition. In contrast, comprehensive restoration focused on restoring functional and sustainable ecosystems can comprehensively address risks associated with fire, insects, and disease. Landscape level planning is required to do this, to introduce heterogeneity from the current unsustainable and largely homogeneous conditions. This includes the need to provide for denser forest patches that provide critical habitat for many organisms, including the northern spotted owl and some of its prey species. Indeed, such dense, fire-prone patches can only be maintained when they're embedded in a forest matrix that has been restored to conditions that resist rather than facilitate the spread of insect epidemics and stand replacement wildfire. Stand-level ecological restoration begins with the retention of all older trees and other ecologically important features such as large hardwood trees, enhanced by clearing competing young trees and ground and ladder fields from their vicinity. Portions of the stand are selected as skips where no thinning is done to preserve important features. The remaining stand is subject to thinning treatment designed to reduce overall stand density to a sustainable level, with small openings or gaps of small or moderate size created to provide opportunities for regeneration of sun-loving trees. In the last few months, we've tested these restoration principles in the OMC forests of Southwest Oregon. In our work with both the Roseburg BLM and Medford BLM, we found that these restoration principles can effectively guide the management of these dry forests once they are aligned with local conditions and characteristics. We also found that ecological restoration was compatible with the production of significant timber volumes and economic benefits. From these tests and others throughout Oregon, we conclude that ecologically informed active management can simultaneously contribute to sustaining communities and sustaining forests. But there are a number of keys to active management here. Several critical issues we've identified relevant to widespread active management and forest restoration. We list 5 needed actions below. We believe that any changes that result from these suggested actions should be integrated into the Northwest Forest Plan. Without such integration, implementation will flounder. Completion of a recovery plan for the northern spotted owl. Absolutely essential. The abundance of owls in the Roseburg and Medford districts and unknowns surrounding the ultimate habitat conservation system, that is reserve system, that will be adopted, create great uncertainty about where, when, and how timber can be harvested. Little management stability will be achieved until the northern spotted owl recovery plan is finished and adopted. Thus, we believe its completion has the highest of priorities. Development of dry forest strategies in the northern spotted owl recovery plan. Dry forests will need a strategy for owl recovery tailored to their processes and conditions as part of northern spotted owl recovery. Also, pursuit of the restoration strategy suggested here, independently of the recovery plan, could lead to serious conflict. Thus, it's essential to integrate principles of ecological restoration for dry forests into the recovery plan itself. Third, retention of old growth trees. Older trees are keystones of our forest ecosystems as well as cultural icons. We continue to believe that a commitment to end old tree harvest would speed the management of the dry forests of Southwest Oregon urgently needs. Fourth, a scientific review of the red tree vole, which, by the way, is a small tree-dwelling mammal. Quite cute. Habitat needs and distribution of this species are now well known, and a scientific team can define needed conservation measures. Finally, pilot projects to test restoration ideas in the context of northern spotted owl recovery. Our recent work with the BLM in Southwest Oregon and the collaboration groups there have increased our confidence that the restoration strategies described can be successfully applied. Still, questions remain about how the strategy might work in a large landscape, particularly while also dealing with the needs of the northern spotted owl. Pilot projects would be a promising way to develop strategies for active management of Southwest Oregon's dry forest. And 2 pictures, one from our Roseburg field trip and one from Medford. Medford's last Wednesday, Roseburg was earlier, and Progress at DeFazio was along. The fellow in the right picture, who looks like perhaps he is blessing the flock, is Jerry Franklin.
Jerry, that's your cue.
Okay, well, I'll just add I just want to emphasize a couple of points. First of all, this is about restoring ecosystems. It's not about any singular objective. It's not about treating fuels or worrying about owls or anything else. It's really about trying to restore these ecosystems and these landscapes so that they will have a reasonable possibility of being able to sustain themselves over the long term, because these landscapes are not currently in a condition that are going to be sustainable. And I rather wish that we could be standing up on a high point that we were on last Monday, looking out over the Applegate Valley, looking at a block of about 10,000 acres of this ONC landscape, a group of hills and mountains basically dominated almost completely by dense coniferous forests dominated by Douglas fir. And those forests are simply not sustainable in the long term. And what we're potentially looking at there is a green landscape which will either become black or red, just depending upon whether fire or insects get to it first. And what my vision is for that landscape is one where we've done a restoration that leaves that entire forest landscape forest occupied, but in a condition where it's going to have a much better probability of being able to persist for the next decades, century, than it is in its current condition. And in doing that kind of ecosystem-focused restoration, not fuel treatments, but ecosystem restoration, providing greater ecological benefits as well as social benefits for society. So, I wish we could be standing out there looking at that forest landscape and talking about it firsthand. I think, that's basically all I want to say about this, and I think I'll just allow the time for other folks and any questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Jerry. And let's maybe all kind of try and keep, we know what that area looks like, and we all are familiar with areas like that. Keep that in our vision as we all present ideas here to the Secretary. Remember, that's the focus here today, giving the Secretary ideas here so we can move forward with proper management on the ONC lands and realize all of these benefits we've talked about. We're almost exactly on schedule, which is great. I'm going to be pretty strict with the time, but we're going to have presentations from the industry, followed by the conservation community, and then commissioners. And you all are free to divide up that time however you wish among your members who are here, despite it doesn't have to be people particularly on the agenda. So with that, I'm going to turn to you, Tom, and go right ahead.
I'm going to turn it over to AFRC's Chairman Paul Beck, and we'll let some of the folks that have some real skin in the game talk about their operations.
And I'm going to run a timer here, so we're going to go right for it.
He didn't start talking about time limits until he looked at me.
Yeah.
Again, welcome. This is to quote our Vice President, this is a big deal. We appreciate you coming. We are not a forest industry. We're a forest-dependent community. I'll turn it over to Steve to start with, and then we'll come back to me.
I'm Steve Swanson. I'm the president of Swanson Group.
Speak up, Steve. I'm sorry we don't have your
I'm
mic.
Steve Swanson. I'm president of Swanson Group. We're a family-owned company based in Southern Oregon. Our corporate headquarters are in Glendale. In Glendale, we have our sawmill there that's really the starship, the flagship of our entire company. Been in business for over 60 years. The Medford BLM district last year sold 16.7 million board feet. To put that in context, that single mill would use over 70 million board feet. It's just not enough to sustain us. It is the lack of management, the lack of harvest on the Medford BLM is a significant contributing factor to the near total closure and elimination of over 100 jobs in Glendale. We'd already curtailed to 50%, and this week we're now down to about 10% of those original employees maintaining their positions there. It's a very big deal to stand in front of people that you have grown up with and tell them that the mill across the street, that is an absolute state-of-the-art mill built and designed to run small logs, that we're incapable of having a steady supply of material we can afford to run through there, and their livelihoods and their communities are being decimated by that.
Thanks, Steve. Steve talked about 70 million board feet. The district that Congressman DeFazio represents is the largest timber producing district in the United States. To put the milling capacity in perspective in the 5-county area of southwest Oregon, we have the ability to, when running at capacity, to manufacture 1.2 billion board feet of logs. That's a lot. And I'm going to borrow something from Doug and Francis, a tool that they like to use to show how much that really is if you line up those log trucks end to end, a day would be 13 miles long. A year would be 3,500 miles. Would stretch, if you stretched them from Roseburg, Oregon to Washington, D.C., they wouldn't fit. But if you went to Vancouver Island, which is very appropriate in my case, and you stretched them down through Roseburg, across the country, to the mall, by your office, back out to Gettysburg, back to Washington, D.C., they'd fit. And that is an incredibly huge volume of wood. It boggles the mind when you think of it in those terms. But if you take it and look at it another way, at 1.2 billion board feet, the ownership, the total acreage of that 5-county area is about 8.5 million acres. About 57% of that ownership is federal, BLM and Forest Service. If you took that 1.2 billion feet and applied it to that acreage, 4.4 million acres, it would be one 17-inch log, DBH, breast height, per acre, per year, is what you would have to cut. It's a huge, obscene volume of wood. When you take it down to the acreage of what the federal ownership is, it's tiny. It's 280 board feet per acre on a land area that's growing, conservative estimates, 500 per year, forever. And we're talking about cutting 17 million feet on the Medford district. It can be done. It can be done. In the last year, we've been asked to collaborate, and we've met Andy has probably spent more time with me than he ever hoped to. I've spent time. A lot more. It's unseen. We have talked, we have discussed, we've eaten pie together, we've eaten lunches together. And quite honestly, with little success. Very little success. We don't agree. It would be my hope that at some point, our leaders in the administration, congressional leaders, would listen to what's being said between the parties and act. And act soon. Because we're, all last summer I heard about the Gulf oil spill, and we've got an emergency here in Southwest Oregon that is beyond that in my mind, and it's an emergency of our own making. So I would ask you to listen and act soon. With that, I'll go to Jim Dudley.
I'm Jim Dudley, the timber manager for Roseburg Forest Products, and just to hit our story, we're starting into our 75th year of existence. Small family-run company with approximately 450 million board feet of log consumption a year at capacity. So when you hear about volumes out there, that's what we use between the 3 plywood plants and our sawmill. All within Douglas and Coos County. So, we look at it in terms of board feet of growth and biological potential on this O&C property that we're discussing today. And conservatively, 1.2 billion feet of annual growth a year coming off of this timberland. If you look at the private industry that's being managed around it, it's being managed to that type of capacity and a sustainable yield. What the Whopper did was look at that and cut it in half, and we all said, this isn't what this land could produce, but it's a start. It was a way to move forward, a way to get back to active management, and that's what we're here today to support. Is rather than deferring management to the insects and wildfire and everything else that's gone on in the last 17 years since timber harvest in this area has basically spun out. We want to support active management. We want to see a way where we can work our way out of our social and economic issues rather than relying on timber payments coming from the rest of the taxpayers